Hello and welcome to my video all about how to make an upholstered footstool. I've been wanting to incorporate velvet embossing into a project for a long time, and as soon as I decided I needed a footstool in my life, I knew I wanted to combine the two ideas into one project. I decided to use strawberries as the theme and have that inspire the colour and the embossed pattern. And the rest of the project is just basic upholstery with low-tech tools. I'm personally very pleased with the result and I hope you enjoy this project. In order to follow this tutorial, you're going to need these items. For the wood, I used a 30 by 40 cm piece of 12mm plywood, and I wouldn't use wood any thinner than that because you do want it to be quite sturdy. For the velvet embossing specifically, you're going to need a spray bottle of water, a rubber stamp, and an iron and ironing board. If you want to emboss the outer fabric like I've done, you should try and use a velvet that's not nylon or polyester in order to get the best results. I used a silk blend velvet which was silk and viscose in a cherry red colour, and I used most of 1 metre length. The velvet you use should contain rayon or viscose, and usually you'll find that this is blended with acetate or silk. My stamp was a raindrop shape and I bought it from Miss Honeybird on Etsy. It's also possible to use a foam stamp, but these are likely to deform due to the heat quite quickly. I've also seen people use flat cut-out wooden shapes. For the footstool legs, I used 4 straight tapered oak legs that were 150mm long. I got these from eBay and they came with level fixing plates, which are threaded to fit the M8 bolts protruding out of the top of each leg. I used 4x16mm posi drive screws with countersunk heads to attach these plates to the wood, and I needed 12 of these screws. What you will need to attach the footstool legs is completely dependent on what legs you buy. Okay, so the first step is to cut out the rectangle of wood that's going to be the base of your footstool. I just used a 30 by 40 cm piece of 12mm scrap plywood that I already had, so I didn't need to cut it out. Then you need to sand the edges and decide where you're going to attach the fixing plates for the legs. There are 2 ways to attach these fixing plates: either screw them straight onto the base of the wood, or drill a hole through the wood and push the fixing plate into the hole from the top. Both ways work, but the second way is stronger and will affix the legs flush to the base, whereas the first method would create a gap between the base of the footstool and the legs. So I went for the second method. Measure out on the wood where you want the fixing plates and therefore the legs to be positioned, and draw lines to help you. I drew lines 1.5 inches from the edges first, then I placed each of the plates just inside these lines at each corner. Once you have the plates in the right places, use a pencil to mark in the centre of each one, so you know where to drill the holes. You then need to move to an area that's well ventilated, put on your breathing mask and drill the holes in the places you marked, so that the fixing plates can be pushed through from the top. I drilled a 1/4 inch or 6mm pilot hole in each location first, and then I drilled 1/2 inch or 12.7mm holes for the fixing plates. Make sure you have some scrap wood underneath to protect your work surface. I then used a countersink to quickly neaten the edges around the holes, but if you don't have a countersink, feel free to just use sandpaper. You then just need to attach your fixing plates to the base. I just pushed the plates through the holes and attached them using 4x16mm posi drive screws with countersunk heads. These screws are a little long for the plywood I'm using, so they do slightly poke out of the base, but not enough to be a problem. Next, we need to cut out the piece of foam that's going to go on top of this base. For this, I'm going to be using some high density upholstery foam that's 2 inches thick. You first need to place your wooden base on top of the foam on top of a cutting mat. Carefully use a large knife, making sure the knife isn't angled to either side, to cut through the foam and make it the size you need. It's best to use long slicing motions when you do this. At this point, I used some strong all-purpose glue to attach a piece of calico fabric to the bottom of the wood base, but this turned out to be not necessary. There were 2 reasons I did this. 1, to stop the tiny points of the screws catching on anything, and 2, because I hadn't yet decided how I was going to finish the underside of the footstool, but I knew I didn't want it to be bare wood. To attach the foam to the base, you can then add strong glue to the top of the wood, making sure it is the top, and press the foam down onto it. Then leave it to dry. I then cut off the excess calico around the edges. Next is where we add the quilt batting around the footstool to add a bit of padding to the edges of the wood and also to soften the corners. We basically want to make it all nice and smooth on the top and sides. The first step is to cut out a piece of batting that can wrap all around the foam and fold over onto the wooden base on each side by a few inches. Then centre the footstool, foam side down, onto this piece of batting. Fold one long side of batting up and onto the base and staple it in the centre. Then staple once either side. I tend to space the staples about 1.5 to 2 inches apart. Then repeat the same on the other long side, making sure the batting between the staples is fairly taut. You don't want to have any wrinkles. Keep stapling evenly outwards along these 2 edges until you're 1 inch or 2 from the corners. Repeat these steps for the 2 shorter sides, still trying to make sure the batting is smooth underneath the foam. Feel free to cut away excess batting as you go. Just make sure you leave at least 1/2 inch, or preferably 1 inch, between the staples and the edge of the batting. One option when stapling the corners is to fold the excess batting onto the shorter sides, like I'm showing here. However, I've chosen to aim for a smooth corner without folds. To do this, fold the corner of the batting up and over onto the corner of the wood base so that it's centred, i.e. there's an equal amount of batting on each side. Then staple the batting in the middle about 1 inch from the corner. Then it's all about spreading and manipulating the excess batting until it's smooth all around the corner, and this does take a bit of coaxing. Start on one side of the corner first, lifting the excess batting up on top of the wooden base and trying to spread it out, evenly and smoothly. Staple one small section at a time, travelling towards the corner. Then repeat the same on the other side. Cut off the excess batting on top, trying not to cut within 1/2 inch of a staple. Keep smoothing and adding a couple more staples to try and keep everything neat. Repeat for every corner. And now we're going to emboss the velvet for the outer cover, which is a very satisfying process. Obviously, if you're not using velvet, you can skip this step. In order to do this, you're going to need a spray bottle of water, a rubber stamp, an iron and ironing board, and of course your velvet. You'll most likely want your iron on the lowest heat setting, as this kind of fabric is sensitive to heat, and you'll want any steam settings switched off. If you happen to have a Teflon shoe for your iron, that will be handy to use as well. So first, lay your velvet right side down on your ironing board. Then spray the rubber stamp and the velvet where you're going to emboss it lightly with water. And then press the iron flat and level onto the top of the stamp. Hold still for 10 to 20 seconds and then lift straight off. You should be able to see the outline of your stamp fairly clearly on the back of the fabric. If you aren't using a Teflon shoe and have steam holes in your iron, the fabric you've just pressed may have raised dots or bubbles. If this is the case, carefully use the pointed end of your iron to smooth these rough areas flat. Then carefully peel the velvet off the stamp to see if it's been embossed successfully. You should see a shiny shape with a distinct outline. Then simply repeat this to cover the entire amount of fabric you'll be using. I covered most of 1 metre of fabric. Just make sure that you space out the embossed shapes evenly and angle them randomly so that they don't end up pointing in the same direction or being clustered together. Once the outer fabric is ready, it's added to the footstool in much the same way as the batting. So first, cut out a piece of the fabric that's large enough to wrap around the footstool and have at least a few inches to pull onto the base on each side. Then centre the footstool, top side down, on top of the fabric whilst the fabric is right side down. Fold one long side of the fabric up and onto the base and staple it in the centre. When you do this, try and avoid the line of staples underneath. Staple either side of this first one, then staple outwards until you nearly reach the corner. And repeat on the opposite side. Do the same on the two short sides as well. As before, make sure the fabric remains smooth and fairly taut between the staples. You don't want wrinkles or creases in your fabric, or for it to be stretched at a weird angle. However, you also don't want it so tight that it deforms the padding below, or makes it squashed or bumpy. And then you just need to staple the corners. So first, pull the corner of the fabric up onto the corner of the base and staple it in the centre. Then manipulate the fabric excess on one side to make it as smooth as you can and make the smallest pleat that you can, before stapling it into place. I personally aimed for a pleat either side of the corner, trying to make the pleats as small and as symmetrical as possible. Then do the same on the other side of the corner as well. Then cut off the excess fabric, making sure you don't cut too close to the staples, and then add another couple of staples to just neaten up and flatten any fabric sticking up. Repeat the same for all the corners. You'll want the staples to be about 1.5 inches or more in from the edges, but you also need to avoid covering the holes we made in the wooden base, as this is where the legs will be attached. And then the last part of the covering is the base covering. And although this is optional, it really does help to neaten up the footstool. I simply cut out a rectangle of black felt baize that was large enough to cover all of the velvet edges and the staples underneath. And then I stapled it securely all along the edges. Just make sure you don't have this base fabric so close to the edges that you can see it when the footstool is upright. I place the staples fairly close together to keep it all neat and secure. Note that if you're using a manual staple gun, you'll probably have sore hands after the previous steps, so maybe save this step for another day. Then use an awl to locate the fixing plate threads through the base covering and make a hole. Use small scissors to uncover the entire thread in each corner. And then all that's left to do is to twist the wooden legs securely into place. And as you can see here, I also attached some self-adhesive rubber pads. And that's it, the footstool is complete, and here you can see the finished result. I'm personally really pleased with it, and I really hope you enjoyed this project. Thank you very much for watching.